Adam Worth. The name means nothing to you, but his shadow stretches across every crime thriller you've ever loved. Scotland Yard called him the Napoleon of crime. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle used him as the blueprint for Professor Moriarty, Sherlock Holmes' arch nemesis. For nearly 3 decades, this 5'4" mastermind orchestrated bank heists across 3 continents, ran the largest criminal network in Victorian London, stole $500,000 in diamonds from South Africa, and pulled off one of history's most audacious art thefts, keeping a priceless Gainsborough painting hidden for 25 years. And the most remarkable part? He did it all while sipping champagne in London's high society, and authorities could never prove a thing. So who was the real man behind Moriarty? Let's find out. February 1844, somewhere in Germany. A Jewish family welcomes their first child into a world that offers them very little. The boy's name might have been Adam Worth, or Wirtz, but like so much about him, even his original surname remains uncertain. What we do know is that poverty defined his early years. When Adam was 5, his parents made the decision that countless European families were making. They packed their few belongings and sailed for America, settling in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where his father found work as a tailor. But young Adam wasn't content stitching fabric in his father's shop. At 14, he ran away from home, first to Boston, then eventually to New York City by 1860. For exactly 1 month, he worked honestly as a clerk in a department store. 1 month. It would be, by his own later admission, his first and only honest job. Then the Civil War erupted, and 17-year-old Adam Worth saw an opportunity. He lied about his age and enlisted in the Union Army, partly for adventure, partly because of the $1,000 bounty that came with signing up. Now here's something worth noting about Worth. He wasn't some incompetent trying to hide from combat. Within months of enlisting, he'd been promoted to corporal, then sergeant. He commanded a cannon battery, led men into battle against Robert E. Lee's forces. By all accounts, he was actually good at it. August 30th, 1862. The Second Battle of Bull Run in Virginia. Worth's artillery unit is engaged when Confederate shrapnel tears into him. He's shipped to Georgetown Hospital near Washington, D.C., where he lies recovering, just another wounded soldier among thousands. And then, due to some clerk's error, some unfortunate mix-up in the chaos of wartime record-keeping, Adam Worth is declared killed in action. Now, most people would rush to correct this mistake. Worth saw something else entirely. He saw a door opening. If Adam Worth was officially dead, then Adam Worth could become anyone. He walked out of that hospital and never looked back. What he did next was ingenious in its simplicity. Worth became a bounty jumper, enlisting in regiment after regiment under different names, collecting his signing bonus each time, occasionally even fighting in battles despite detesting violence, then deserting with the money. It was lucrative, it was relatively safe, and it worked beautifully until the Pinkerton Detective Agency started connecting the dots. The Pinkertons were the closest thing America had to a federal police force, private detectives hired by businesses and the government. When they began hunting bounty jumpers, Worth knew it was time to change strategies. He ended up in post-war New York City, a metropolis teeming with opportunity for someone with Worth's particular skill set. The city was awash in illegal gambling, prostitution, and enough chaos to hide in. Worth started small, working as a pickpocket, but he had ambition, and more importantly, he had vision. Within months, he'd formed his own gang of pickpockets. Then he graduated to planning robberies. He wasn't just stealing anymore, he was thinking about how to steal better, how to make it safer, more profitable, more elegant. This is where Worth's criminal philosophy began to take shape. He started asking questions that other thieves weren't asking. How do you reduce risk? How do you plan so thoroughly that violence never becomes necessary? How do you build a structure that protects the people at the top? Keep these questions in mind because they'll define everything Worth does for the next 30 years. Of course, early in his career, Worth wasn't quite the refined mastermind he'd become. He got caught stealing a cash box from an Adams Express wagon and was sentenced to 3 years hard labor at Sing Sing prison. He escaped within weeks, grew a mustache and mutton chops to change his appearance, and decided it was time to work smarter. He needed a mentor, someone who understood crime as a business. Enter Frederica Mandelbaum, better known in New York's underworld as Marm Mandelbaum. If you've never heard of her, you should have. Marm was one of the most powerful criminal financiers in America, a fence who handled millions of dollars in stolen goods. She was the godmother of New York organized crime before anyone even used that phrase. Worth began working for her in the mid-1860s, and under her guidance, he learned something crucial. Crime wasn't just about the act itself, it was about the infrastructure, the planning, the fence, the connections, the whole ecosystem. By 1869, Worth was ready for the big leagues. Marm hired him for a job that required both audacity and precision. A safecracker named Piano Charlie Bullard was locked up in White Plains jail, and Marm wanted him out. Worth and another criminal, Max Shinburn, who'd become Worth's lifelong rival, paid off guards and dug a tunnel under the jailhouse walls. They freed Bullard, and Worth gained both a partner and an enemy that day. Shinburn would remain his competitor, always a step behind. But Bullard became his closest collaborator. November 20th, 1869, Boston, Massachusetts. The Boylston National Bank sits on a busy street, seemingly secure. What the bank doesn't know is that the new health tonic shop next door, the one selling remedies and elixirs, is a complete front. Worth and Bullard rented it for one purpose: to dig through the wall. For weeks, they excavated at night, removing bricks, hauling out debris, working their way toward the bank vault. When they finally broke through, they cleaned out the vault, loading the money into trunks. The take was enormous, around $200,000. But here's where we see both Worth's genius and his one consistent weakness: his trust in logistics. He and Bullard shipped the trunks of stolen money from Boston to New York. The Pinkerton agency, now on the case, tracked the shipment. They knew who'd pulled the job. Worth and Bullard had to move fast. They decided Europe would be safer. They packed up and sailed for Liverpool, England. The Atlantic crossing gave Worth time to think. He needed more than just a new city. He needed a new identity, something bulletproof. Bullard chose to become Charles H. Wells, a Texas oil magnate. Worth picked something more refined. He appropriated the name of Henry Judson Raymond, borrowed from the late founder of the New York Times. It was perfect, respectable, cultured, completely fabricated. From this point forward, Worth would live as Henry J. Raymond, gentleman financier. Liverpool in the early 1870s was a bustling port city, and it's here that both Worth and Bullard met a 16-year-old barmaid named Kitty Flynn. Both men were immediately smitten. Kitty was sharp enough to eventually learn their real identities, and instead of running or blackmailing them, she simply chose Bullard. She married him. But she never entirely shut Worth out, and the paternity of Kitty's two daughters, born in 1870 and 1877, remained ambiguous. Bullard claimed them. Worth claimed them. Even William Pinkerton, who'd later investigate Worth for decades, believed Worth fathered both girls. Kitty herself may not have known for certain. While the newlywed Bullards honeymooned, Worth didn't sit idle. He robbed local pawn shops, amassed more capital, and when the couple returned, he split the proceeds with them. This strange arrangement, this criminal ménage à trois, somehow worked. In 1871, all three moved to Paris together. Paris was still recovering from the chaos of the Paris Commune, and its police force was in disarray. Worth saw opportunity. Using money from the Boston heist, they purchased a 3-story building near the Paris Opera House and opened the American Bar. The ground floor was a legitimate restaurant and bar. The upper floor was an illegal gambling den. But Worth didn't just run an illegal casino, he engineered it. The gambling tables were built to fold into the walls and floor. A buzzer system connected the floors. If police approached, staff downstairs would alert customers upstairs, and within minutes, the gambling den transformed into an innocent social club. The American Bar became wildly popular. Honest Parisians rubbed elbows with criminals. Employees from the Boylston National Bank, the very institution Worth had robbed, drank there without knowing who owned the place. It was profitable, it was audacious, and it couldn't last. In 1873, William Pinkerton walked into the American Bar. William was the son of Allen Pinkerton and had taken over much of the agency's operations. Worth recognized him instantly. The message was clear. The Pinkertons were in Europe, and they were watching. Worth knew it was time to fold. On closing night, Worth put the bar to use one last time. A diamond dealer visited, and Worth's crew relieved him of a bag of diamonds worth thousands. Then Worth, Bullard, and Kitty liquidated everything and moved to London. London in the 1870s was the capital of the world's most powerful empire, a city where massive wealth and crushing poverty existed side by side. Worth looked at London and saw potential on a scale he'd never imagined. He and the Bullards bought Western Lodge, a Georgian mansion at Clapham Common. Worth also leased an apartment in Mayfair, the most fashionable district in the city. As Henry J. Raymond, he joined high society. He hosted dinner parties, attended the theater, donated to charities. He was, by all appearances, a successful and respectable gentleman. But beneath this veneer, Worth was building something unprecedented. A vast criminal syndicate operating through layers of intermediaries. Here's how it worked. Worth never personally committed crimes anymore, with rare exceptions we'll get to. Instead, he planned them, financed them, and took a cut of the profits. The people executing these crimes, the safecrackers, the burglars, the forgers, never knew who was really paying them. They worked through intermediaries, who worked through other intermediaries, who reported to Worth. It was a corporate structure applied to crime, and it was brilliant. Worth established one absolute rule: no violence. His crews could rob, forge, burgle, swindle, but they couldn't hurt anyone. This wasn't sentiment, it was strategy. Violence drew attention. Violence created victims who wanted revenge. Violence made police investigations personal. Worth understood that if you kept crime professional and avoided creating traumatized victims, law enforcement treated it as just another property crime. Scotland Yard knew something was happening. They began noticing patterns, connections between seemingly unrelated crimes across London and beyond. But they couldn't prove anything. One Scotland Yard inspector named John Shore made capturing Worth his personal obsession. Shore would spend years trying to catch the man he knew was behind the network, and year after year, he came up empty. Worth's empire wasn't without complications. His brother John showed up in England looking for work and got involved in an international forgery scheme. John was sent to Paris to exchange forged English pounds for francs, but he mistakenly went to a bank Worth had specifically told him to avoid. The bank spotted the fake bills, arrested John, and extradited him to England into the custody of Inspector Shore himself. Worth had to hire expensive lawyers to get his brother acquitted and shipped back to America. It cost him money and put him on Shore's radar even more. On another occasion, 4 of Worth's most trusted associates were arrested in Istanbul for spreading forged credit notes across Europe. They were convicted and sentenced to 7 years hard labor. Worth had to bribe Turkish officials to get them released before the Pinkertons could extradite them to the United States. It cost him a fortune, but it maintained the integrity of his network. Then there was Bullard. His alcoholism was getting worse, his behavior more erratic and violent, everything Worth hated. Eventually, Bullard left for New York, and Kitty followed soon after. Worth was alone in London, running his empire, attending society functions, and by the early 1880s, he'd even gotten married. His wife, Louise Margaret Boljon, possibly never knew his real identity. They had a son, Henry, in 1888, and a daughter, Beatrice, in 1891. Worth was living a double life so complete that even his own wife didn't know who he really was. But we need to talk about what happened in 1876, because this is the crime that defines Worth's legend. That year, a painting resurfaced that the art world thought was lost. Thomas Gainsborough's portrait of Georgiana Cavendish, Duchess of Devonshire, originally painted in 1783, had vanished from public view for decades. It was finally discovered in the possession of an elderly schoolteacher who'd bought it for next to nothing and actually cut it down to fit over her fireplace. When art experts realized what it was, the painting was sold at auction. Christie's put it up, and a bidding war erupted. The final price was 10,000 guineas, equivalent to millions today, an absolutely staggering sum. The buyer was art dealer Thomas Agnew, who placed it in his Bond Street gallery. Junius Morgan, father of the legendary J.P. Morgan, wanted that painting badly. Worth knew this. Initially, Worth's plan was straightforward: steal the painting, ransom it to Morgan or Agnew, use the money to get his brother John out of some legal trouble. It was supposed to be business. But then something unexpected happened. May 27th, 1876, midnight. Worth stood outside the Agnew Gallery on Bond Street, dressed in a top hat and elegant evening wear. He was accompanied by two associates, his bodyguard Jack Phillips, nicknamed Junka, and another thief called Little Joe Elliott. They climbed to the second-floor window, forced it open, and slipped inside. Worth moved through the darkened gallery until he found it. Gainsborough's Duchess, illuminated by moonlight filtering through the windows. Worth carefully cut the canvas from its frame, rolled it up, and the three men slipped back out into the London night. The theft was clean, professional, perfect. Here's where the plan was supposed to go: negotiate the ransom, collect the money, return the painting. But by the time Worth got back to Western Lodge, his brother John's legal troubles had been resolved without needing ransom money. The practical reason for the theft was gone. Worth should have sold the painting anyway. It was worth a fortune. Any rational criminal would have. Worth didn't sell it. He looked at that painting, at Georgiana Cavendish's face captured in oil by one of England's greatest artists, and he fell in love with it. Not with the money it represented, with the painting itself. He kept it. This is where Worth stops making sense in conventional criminal terms. He slept with the painting hidden under his mattress. When he traveled, he carried it in a specially made briefcase with a false bottom. For 25 years, through multiple countries, through marriages and business dealings and close calls with police, Worth kept that painting with him. It became, in some strange way, the most important relationship in his life. Junka Phillips and Little Joe Elliott couldn't understand this. They'd risked their freedom for a painting Worth refused to sell. Phillips grew resentful. One day, he tried to set Worth up, attempting to get him to discuss the theft in front of an undercover police informant at a bar. Worth realized what was happening mid-conversation, knocked the table over onto Phillips, and never spoke to him again. Little Joe got his share of money, and Worth sent him back to the United States. Once there, Little Joe tried to rob the Union Trust Company, got caught, and in exchange for leniency, told the Pinkertons everything he knew about Worth's operations, including the Duchess theft. The Pinkertons immediately contacted Scotland Yard. Finally, they had confirmation of Worth's involvement in a major crime, but they still couldn't prove anything. Little Joe didn't know where Worth kept the painting. The only evidence was the word of a convicted criminal trying to reduce his sentence. Inspector Shore must have been furious. He knew Worth did it. Everyone knew Worth did it. But knowing and proving are different things. Worth, meanwhile, decided he needed to rebuild his finances. Some of the money he'd spent bailing out associates in Istanbul had created a gap in his resources. So he did what any Victorian criminal mastermind would do. He went to South Africa to steal diamonds. Cape Town in the early 1880s was in the middle of a diamond rush. Fortunes were being made in the mines, and massive quantities of uncut diamonds were being transported. Worth's first attempt was crude by his standards. He and an accomplice named Charlie King tried to hold up a horse-drawn wagon transporting diamonds at gunpoint. The guards fought them off. King fled. Worth stayed in the area and planned something better. He adopted a new identity as a feather merchant and befriended the local postmaster. This was important because if diamond shipments missed the ferry to England, they'd be stored overnight at the post office. Worth made a wax impression of the postmaster's safe key during a visit to his office and had a duplicate made. When the next diamond shipment was scheduled, Worth went to the harbor early and cut the express ferry loose from its moorings. The ferry drifted away. The diamonds, with no ferry to catch, were stored in the post office safe, exactly as Worth knew they would be. That night, he let himself in with his duplicate key and stole $500,000 worth of uncut diamonds. Back in London, Worth partnered with a man named Ned Weinert to open a jewelry store. Weinert and Company sold diamonds at prices lower than competitors could match because they never had to pay for inventory. It was the perfect way to fence the South African haul. By the early 1890s, Worth had been operating for over 2 decades. He'd built a fortune, raised children, maintained his double life. but cracks were forming. In 1892, Worth heard that Charlie Bullard, his old partner, was in a Belgian prison and might have died. Worth decided to visit Belgium to find out. This decision would end everything. October 5, 1892. Liège, Belgium. Worth learned that Bullard was still alive, just imprisoned. While there, Worth made a catastrophic error in judgment. He impulsively decided to rob a money delivery cart, and he did it with two associates he'd never worked with before, an American named Johnny Curtin and a Dutch small-time crook named Alonzo Henne. Everything about this violated Worth's own principles. It wasn't carefully planned. His partners were untested. It was reckless. The robbery went badly. Police caught Worth at the scene. Curtin and Henne escaped. Worth was arrested and refused to identify himself. For a week, he sat in a Belgian jail cell saying nothing. The Belgian authorities sent his photograph to police departments across Europe and America. The New York Police Department identified him. Scotland Yard identified him. After 20 years of staying ahead of law enforcement, Worth's face had finally caught up with his crimes. Then came the betrayal. Max Shinburn, Worth's old rival from the Bullard jailbreak back in 1869, was also in a Belgian prison. When Shinburn learned Worth was in custody, he contacted the police and told them everything he knew about Worth's criminal history. Every heist, every scheme, every detail Shinburn could remember. It was revenge for decades of being second best. Worth's trial began on March 20th, 1893. The prosecutor laid out everything: the Boylston Bank robbery, the American bar, the diamond thefts, the vast criminal network. Worth's defense was simple: deny everything except what they'd caught him doing. He admitted the Liège robbery, claiming it was a desperate act committed because he needed money. Everything else? Hearsay. The Boylston robbery was 2 decades old with no physical evidence. The American bar was just a bar. The diamond thefts couldn't be proven. Worth claimed his wealth came from legal gambling. The court could only convict him of what he'd been caught doing, the Liège robbery. 7 years in Leuven Central Prison, Belgium's toughest institution. Prison destroyed Worth in ways police never could. The man who'd commanded criminal empires, who'd dined with London society, who'd lived in mansions and sailed on yachts, was now in a cell. But it got worse. Shinburn, who'd received a reduced sentence for his testimony, used his remaining time in prison to hire other inmates to beat Worth whenever possible. Worth endured assault after assault, protection from guards he no longer had the resources to bribe. Then Worth received news that broke something inside him. Johnny Curtin, one of the associates who'd escaped the Liège robbery, was supposed to be taking care of Worth's wife in London. Instead, Curtin had seduced her and then abandoned her. Louise Worth, unable to cope, had a mental breakdown and was committed to an asylum. Their 2 children, Henry and Beatrice, had been sent to live with Worth's brother John in America. In 1894, both Mar Mandelbaum and Kitty Flynn died of illness. The 2 women who'd shaped Worth's criminal career and personal life were gone. Worth sat in his Belgian cell, beaten, separated from his children, knowing his wife didn't remember him, and likely wondering if any of it had been worth it. He was released in 1897 after 5 years, granted early release for good behavior. Worth was 53 years old, broken in health but not in spirit. He had one goal: get his children back and give them a different life than his own. First, he needed money. In London, he robbed a diamond shop for £4,000. Then he visited his wife in the asylum. Louise barely recognized him. Worth said goodbye and traveled to New York to see his children. Then he did something remarkable. He contacted his oldest enemy, William Pinkerton. The Pinkertons had been chasing Worth for 30 years. William Pinkerton had visited the American bar in Paris, had interviewed little Joe Elliott, had built files on Worth's activities across 3 continents. And now Worth walked into Pinkerton's Chicago office and asked to talk. For 3 days, Worth told Pinkerton everything: his entire life story, every crime, every scheme, the complete history of the Napoleon of crime. Pinkerton wrote it all down, and that manuscript still exists in the Pinkerton archives in Van Nuys, California. Why did Worth do this? Partly because he knew Pinkerton was the only person who could appreciate the full scope of what he'd accomplished. Partly because he needed Pinkerton's help for one final deal. Worth still had the Duchess of Devonshire painting. He'd kept it through 25 years, through 3 countries, through prison. He'd never sold it, never even tried. But now, he needed money to support his children. Worth offered Pinkerton a deal. He'd return the painting to Thomas Agnew and Sons in exchange for $25,000 and immunity from prosecution. Everyone would benefit. Agnew would get the painting back. The Pinkertons would get credit for solving the case. Worth would get money and freedom from further legal trouble. All parties agreed. On March 28, 1901, the exchange happened in Chicago. Worth handed over the Duchess of Devonshire, the painting he'd stolen 25 years earlier, the painting he'd slept with under his mattress, the painting he'd refused to sell even when desperate for money, was finally returned. Worth received his $25,000. The painting later sold to J.P. Morgan, Junius's son, for $150,000. Worth got a fraction of its value, but he kept his freedom. Worth returned to London with his children and spent the last months of his life with them. According to reports, he lived extravagantly on proceeds from his continued work as a receiver for international thieves. Even in his final year, Worth couldn't completely leave the life. He died on January 8, 1902, at the age of 57. He was buried in Highgate Cemetery in a mass pauper's grave under the name Henry J. Raymond, the identity he'd stolen 30 years earlier. For decades, his grave was unmarked. In 1997, the Jewish American Society for Historic Preservation erected a small tombstone. After 95 years, Adam Worth finally got his real name back. But here's the strangest part of Worth's legacy. His son, Henry Worth, the boy who'd been raised by Worth's brother in America, while Worth sat in a Belgian prison, took advantage of the agreement between his father and William Pinkerton. Henry Worth became a Pinkerton detective. The son of the Napoleon of crime spent his career catching criminals, and he was apparently quite good at it. As for the painting, the Duchess of Devonshire went through several owners before returning to Chatsworth House, the ancestral home of the Cavendish family, in 1994. It hangs there today, 118 years after Worth cut it from its frame in a London gallery. Now, about that Moriarty connection. In 1893, the same year Worth stood trial in Belgium, Arthur Conan Doyle published The Final Problem, the short story that introduced Professor James Moriarty. Doyle described Moriarty as a man who sits motionless like a spider in the center of a web, controlling a vast criminal network while remaining beyond the reach of the law. The description is precise. He is the Napoleon of crime. He is the organizer of half that is evil and of nearly all that is undetected in this great city. Vincent Starrett, a Sherlock Holmes scholar, later confirmed that Doyle told Dr. Gray Chandler Briggs he'd based Moriarty on Adam Worth. The parallels are obvious. Both Worth and Moriarty ran criminal empires through intermediaries. Both remained untouchable by law enforcement for decades. Both were called the Napoleon of crime. The phrase wasn't invented by Doyle. It was what Scotland Yard detective Robert Anderson actually called Worth, and Doyle simply used it for his fictional villain. But here's what's interesting. Moriarty is a purely evil genius in the Holmes stories, a man with no redeeming qualities. Worth was far more complicated. He had a strict code against violence. He took care of his associates when they were arrested. He maintained bizarre but apparently genuine relationships with people like Kitty Flynn. He fell in love with a painting and kept it not for its monetary value, but because it meant something to him. He ultimately cooperated with his greatest enemy and turned his son away from a criminal life. Was Worth a good person? Absolutely not. He stole millions, built an organization that committed countless crimes, and lived luxuriously off money taken from others. But he was human in ways that Professor Moriarty never is in the stories. Worth had weaknesses, made impulsive decisions, formed attachments, felt genuine emotions. The real Napoleon of crime was, paradoxically, more believable than his fictional counterpart because he was messier, more contradictory, more human. What stays with me about Worth's story isn't the crimes themselves, impressive as they were. It's the strange relationship he developed with William Pinkerton. These two men spent 30 years on opposite sides. Pinkerton hunted Worth across continents. Worth evaded Pinkerton with carefully constructed lies and layered identities. And yet, When Worth finally sat down with Pinkerton in 1897, they spent 3 days talking, and Pinkerton wrote down every word. There was respect there, maybe even something approaching friendship between two professionals who understood each other better than anyone else could. Pinkerton could have arrested Worth, could have pushed for prosecution on any number of old crimes. Instead, he helped Worth return the painting and negotiate a deal that let Worth spend his final years with his children. And Worth, who'd spent his life lying to everyone, told Pinkerton the complete truth about everything he'd done. It's one of the strangest criminal justice relationships in history. In the end, Adam Worth proved something that fiction often struggles to capture. Real criminals are rarely the brilliant masterminds we imagine, and the brilliant masterminds are rarely as successful as we'd like to believe. Worth was genuinely brilliant, legitimately successful, and still made catastrophically stupid decisions when emotion overrode planning. He stole a fortune but died in a pauper's grave. He built a criminal empire but ended up beaten in a Belgian prison. He maintained a perfect double life, but his wife went insane, not knowing who he really was. Professor Moriarty falls off Reichenbach Falls in an eternal struggle with Sherlock Holmes. Adam Worth died quietly in London, surrounded by his children, having made peace with the man who'd chased him for 3 decades. Fiction gave us the cleaner ending. Reality gave us the more interesting one. The Duchess of Devonshire hangs at Chatsworth House today, fully restored, none the worse for its 25-year detour through Adam Worth's strange criminal career. Worth himself lies under a small tombstone in Highgate Cemetery, finally identified by his real name nearly a century after his death. And somewhere in a Pinkerton archive in California, a manuscript sits that contains the complete confessions of a man who pulled off some of the most audacious crimes in history, written down by the detective who finally caught him, not through investigation, but through conversation. That's the story of Adam Worth, the real Napoleon of crime, the man who inspired Professor Moriarty, who stole millions, who kept a painting for love instead of money, and who ultimately defeated the law not by escaping it, but by outliving his usefulness to it. He was smaller than the legend, more complicated than the fiction, and far more interesting than either.